My children tried to steal $10 million from me, and in the end, they were begging on their knees at the door for me to let them in. Do you know what it feels like when the people you love most stab you in the back and then smile at you as if nothing happened? Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for 1 second you feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. My name is Kathy Hope Wilson. I am 73 years old, and for 45 years, I worked as an elementary school teacher in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. I live in a red brick ranch house in the Scottsdale area, with a backyard full of walled-in rose bushes I planted myself when my children were small. Every morning, at 6 o'clock, I get up to prepare a cup of good old-fashioned drip coffee on the blue gas range I bought in 1985, when my husband Robert was still alive and helped me carry in the grocery bags. It was a Tuesday in October when my world collapsed like a house of cards. I was sitting in my wooden rocking chair, the same one where I nursed Scott and Lucy more than 40 years ago, reading the local newspaper, the Arizona Republic, while waiting for the water to boil for my chamomile tea. The scent of a vanilla candle in my living room mixed with the aroma of the bacon and pancakes I had heated for breakfast, when I heard the familiar sound of the iron gate opening with that screech I never bothered to fix, because it reminded me that someone was arriving home. But this time, it wasn't a visit of affection. Scott came in first, his black leather shoes gleaming under the patio light, his white shirt perfectly ironed, and that serious expression he had adopted since he became a certified public accountant. Behind him came Lucy, my youngest daughter, with her designer purse hanging from her shoulder, and those dark sunglasses she never took off, even inside the house. Both moved with the stiffness of people who had rehearsed what they were going to say, like actors preparing for a play I didn't know I was about to witness. "Mum," Scott said, without even giving me a hug like he has since he was a kid, "we need to talk to you about something very important." Lucy settled into the green velvet armchair that had belonged to my mother-in-law, crossed her legs, and looked at me with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's about your situation, Mum. We're worried about you." I put the newspaper down on the coffee table, next to the framed photo of all of us at Scott's wedding 8 years ago. In that picture, I'm holding my grandson David in my arms while he plays with my pearl earrings. Everyone is smiling genuinely. How different my family looked then, when I still believed that love was enough to hold together the people you care about most. "My situation?" I asked, feeling a cold sensation crawl up my back like when it rains in January and the wind sneaks through the window cracks. Scott pulled a manila folder from his briefcase, the same kind he used for clients at the accounting firm where he worked. "Mum, you're 73 years old now. This house is too big for you. You have a lot of money sitting around without doing anything productive. And well, at your age, it's normal to sometimes forget things." "I don't forget anything," I retorted, feeling indignation warm my cheeks. Lucy leaned forward with that sugary voice she had used since she was little when she wanted something. "Of course not, Mummy. But wouldn't it be better if we helped you manage everything? We could put the accounts in our names too, so that when something happens, there won't be any legal complications." "When something happens," I repeated, feeling as if someone had opened a valve of ice water in my stomach. Scott opened the folder and spread several documents on the table. "Dad left a considerable inheritance, Mum. $10 million between property, savings, and investments. That's a lot of money for one person alone." There it was, the naked truth, without disguises or pretty words. They hadn't come to visit because they missed me. They hadn't come to have coffee and ask me how I had slept. They had come for my money. I looked at the papers Scott had placed in front of me. Documents of assignment of assets, powers of attorney, contracts. I didn't completely understand, but which I suspected meant handing over everything Robert and I had built during 35 years of marriage. I remembered my husband's calloused hands when he worked construction on the weekends to save extra money, how we counted dollars on this very table every Sunday night, planning our children's future, dreaming of leaving them something better than what we had had. "Do you think we're going to let you spend it all by yourself?" Lucy said, and her voice sounded different, harder, as if she had removed a mask she had been wearing for years. "At that age, you don't even know what you're doing, Mum," Scott nodded, supporting his sister with the naturalness of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. "Yes, it's better to leave that in the hands of younger, more lucid people. It's the best for everyone. You've lived long enough." Those words fell on me like stones. You've lived long enough. As if my life were a movie that had reached its end, and someone had decided it was time to turn off the screen. As if my 73 years were a terminal illness, instead of an accumulation of wisdom and experience. I remained silent for a moment that felt eternal, watching these two people who had come out of my womb, whom I had carried in my arms all night when they had a fever, whom I had defended from unfair teachers and cruel friends, whom I had taught to walk, to read, to be good human beings. Now they were sitting in my living room, surrounded by the memories of a happy family, talking to me as if I were an annoying stranger who had overstayed her welcome in her own life. The silence became so dense that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock that had belonged to my mother, the distant rumble of traffic on Loop 101, and the beating of my own heart that seemed to want to escape from my chest. It was then that I saw my grandson David peek through the kitchen door, with his 8 years and those huge eyes that looked so much like Scott's when he was little. The boy who used to run toward me yelling, "Grandma Kathy," every time he came to visit, now looked at me with a strange shyness, as if he didn't know if he had permission to approach. "Come here, my love," I said, extending my arms. But Lucy quickly got up and took the boy by the hand. "David, go play in the backyard. The adults are talking about important things." The boy looked at me one more time before obeying his aunt, and in that look I saw something that broke my soul. Pity. My own grandson looked at me with pity, as if he had already understood that something had changed forever in our family. Over the next few months, while I tried to process what had happened in my living room, Scott and Lucy began to execute their plan with the precision of surgeons operating on an open heart. I didn't realize it at first, because they arrived with smiles and hugs, carrying bags of bagels and donuts from the local bakery, and feigning concern for my well-being. "Mum, you look tired," Lucy would say, while reviewing the papers I had on the dining table. "Why don't you let me help you with the bank accounts, just so you don't stress yourself out so much?" Scott would show up on Saturday mornings with his laptop under his arm, setting up at the kitchen table as if it were his personal office. "I'm going to organize everything digitally for you, Mum. It's easier that way. I just need you to give me your passwords so I can update your information." I, like the trusting idiot I had been all my life, handed them every key, every account number, every document they asked for. I thought they were fulfilling their promise to take care of me, to make my life simpler. When Scott installed an application on my phone to monitor my health, I thought it was sweet that he worried about me so much. I didn't know that application also recorded my calls and my location. When Lucy convinced me to switch doctors, because Dr. Miller is too old now and you need someone more up to date, I didn't suspect that the new doctor was a friend of her husband's and had agreed to write false medical reports in exchange for money. Reports that described an older woman with signs of cognitive decline and episodes of confusion and memory loss. Friday afternoons had become my favorite day because that's when David came to visit after school. He would sit with me in the backyard, among the pots of red geraniums that bloomed all year, and tell me about his classes, his friends, the books he was reading. I would prepare him a glass of lemonade and oatmeal cookies, the same ones I gave his dad when he was his age. But one Friday in December, when David arrived with his wrinkled school uniform and his Spider-Man backpack, something had changed in him. He sat next to me, but didn't look me in the eyes. He nervously played with the straps of his backpack and answered my questions in monosyllables. "What's wrong, my sweetie?" I asked him, stroking his black hair that always smelled like apple shampoo. David was silent for a moment, looking at his school shoes that were already too small. "Grandma Kathy, my dad says you're sick." I felt as if someone had hit me in the stomach with a hammer. "Sick? What did your dad talk to you about?" "He says you sometimes forget important things and that's why they have to take care of your money now. He says it's normal when people get very old, that it's not your fault, but that you can no longer make decisions alone." My grandson's words came to me like stabs, wrapped in the innocence of a child, repeating what the adults had taught him to believe. My own children were using David to normalize my supposed incapacity, so that even my grandson would see me as a senile old woman who needed constant supervision. "David, look at me," I said, taking his little face in my hands. "Do you think your grandma is sick? Do you think I forget things?" The boy looked at me with those huge eyes full of confusion. "I don't know, Grandma. You remember everything for me. My birthday, my report card grades, even my teacher's name. But my dad knows more than I do." That night, after David left with his backpack and his confusion, I sat in my rocking chair with a cup of herbal tea that had already gone cold in my hands. The house felt different, as if the walls had absorbed poisonous words that now floated in the air I breathed. I started remembering small things I hadn't noticed before. The way Scott had started talking to me slower, as if I didn't understand things right away. How Lucy had started repeating information I already knew, just in case you forgot, Mum. The way they would exchange glances when I was telling an anecdote, as if they were evaluating whether what I was saying made sense. They had been building the narrative of my dementia little by little, like someone building a house brick by brick. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly affectionate gesture had been part of a larger plan to justify what they were about to do. The confirmation arrived on a grey Thursday in January, when Martha, my lifelong neighbour, knocked on my door with a worried expression and a cup of coffee in her hands. "Kathy, forgive me for getting involved where I'm not asked, but I need to tell you something," she said as she sat down in my living room, in the same armchair where Lucy had spoken to me about my situation months ago. Martha had seen Scott coming in and out of my house when I wasn't there. She had seen him with an unknown man, reviewing papers on my patio, taking photos of my living room and my kitchen. When she asked him what he was doing, Scott had told her they were evaluating the house to make some repairs that Mum needs, but which she doesn't realize she needs. "I also saw them at the bank, Kathy. I saw them at Chase Bank with Mr. Ellis, that lawyer who has an office off State Street. My friend works there as a teller and told me they were asking about procedures to declare someone legally incapacitated." Martha's words fell on me like ice water. My children didn't just want my money. They wanted to take away my dignity, my autonomy, my right to exist as a complete human being. They wanted to turn me into a legal minor, someone who needed permission to buy bread or decide what clothes to wear. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed sitting in my bed, looking at the photographs on my nightstand. Scott at his college graduation, with that proud smile as I hugged him. Lucy on her wedding day, radiant in her white dress, telling me she hoped to be as good a mother as I had been. David when he was a baby, asleep in my arms while Robert looked at us tenderly from the armchair. At what moment had these people I loved more than my own life turned into calculating strangers? At what moment did I stop being their mother to become their financial target? The next day, Friday, January 18th, everything changed forever. I returned from the market with bags full of tomatoes, zucchini, and beef to cook a big pot roast, planning to invite Scott and Lucy over on Sunday to try to talk to them, to ask them directly what was going on. But when I got to my iron gate, a young woman in a maid's uniform blocked my way. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you can't come in," she told me in a firm voice, but avoiding looking me in the eyes. "What do you mean I can't come in?" "This is my house," I replied, feeling the market bags slip from my hands. "Mrs. Lucy gave me very clear instructions. She says you can no longer enter without authorization from the family. I'm very sorry, but those are my orders." I stood there on the sidewalk, under the relentless 3 o'clock sun, while the groceries rolled onto the pavement, and my neighbors pretended not to see the spectacle of an elderly woman being expelled from her own home by a servant I didn't know. It was like a nightmare, but I was completely awake. I had to sit on the edge of the curb, with my 73 years on my back and my arthritic knees protesting against the cold concrete, while processing what had just happened. The vegetables kept rolling toward the drain, as if even the produce wanted to escape this surreal situation. A lady passing by with her shopping cart looked at me with that mixture of pity and morbid curiosity that people reserve for traffic accidents and other people's tragedies. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor across the street, who had come out to water her plants as an excuse to see what scandal was unfolding at my house. How could I explain to her that my own children had thrown me out of my home as if I were a loving tenant? How could I tell her that the woman who had raised those children, who had sacrificed her own dreams to pay for their college and school uniforms, was now sitting on the street because they had decided she was in the way? "I'm fine, thank you." I lied, because at 73, one learns that there are pains that are not shared with strangers, no matter how close they live. Mrs. Peterson kept watering her begonias, but I knew her ears were more attentive to my drama than to the needs of her plants. In neighborhoods like ours, gossip travels faster than ambulances. And by Monday, the entire Scottsdale neighborhood would know that Kathy Wilson had been kicked out of her house by her own children. I took out my Nokia phone, that old model that Scott always told me to trade for something more modern, and I dialed the number for Audrey Evans, my friend from my youth, with whom I had lost contact after I was widowed. Audrey had been a teacher with me at Willow Creek Elementary School for 15 years, until she retired and moved to a little place in the Biltmore area. "Kathy, what a surprise. I haven't heard from you in years." She answered with that warm voice that immediately reminded me why we had been such good friends. "Audrey, I need to ask you a very big favor. Could you take me in for a few days? I have a family problem and nowhere to stay." There was a silence on the other end of the line, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of someone looking for excuses. It was the silence of a woman quickly calculating how to accommodate a friend in crisis. "Of course, Kathy. Come over right now. Do you need me to come pick you up?" Audrey arrived in her white Ford Fusion 20 minutes later, with greyer hair than I remembered, but with the same determined smile that had always characterized her. She helped me pick up the scattered groceries and market bags, without asking uncomfortable questions about why the owner of a 2-story house was picking up vegetables from the curb like a homeless person. During the drive to her house, I told her everything. I told her about the documents Scott had brought, about the medical lies, about David asking me if I was sick, about the maid who had blocked my entrance to my own house. Audrey listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally and squeezing the steering wheel tighter each time I described a new betrayal. "Those damned kids," she muttered when I finished my story, and those words, coming out of the mouth of a retired teacher who had always been very proper, sounded like the absolution I needed. Audrey's house was small but cozy, with African violets in all the windows, and the perpetual smell of drip coffee that characterizes the homes of women who have learned to live alone without becoming bitter. She had a tiny living room with a two-seater sofa upholstered in floral fabric and a coffee table full of People magazines and half-solved crossword puzzles. "You can stay as long as you need," she told me as she showed me the sofa where I would sleep. "And I don't want to hear a word about inconvenience or payment. That's what friends are for." That first night at Audrey's house, lying on a sofa that wasn't mine, covered with a blanket that smelled of her rose fabric softener, I stayed awake until 4 o'clock in the morning, crying silently. I wasn't crying from rage or physical pain. I was crying from a sadness so profound that it seemed to come from my bones, from that part of the soul where we keep the disappointments that change us forever. I thought about all the nights I had watched over Scott when he had a fever as a child, putting damp towels on his forehead and singing him Elvis Presley songs until he fell asleep. I remembered the times I had worked double shifts to pay for Lucy's piano lessons because she insisted she wanted to be like the rich girls who had private lessons. I evoked every birthday, every Christmas, every school achievement I had celebrated with them as if they were my own triumphs. Had all that been a long-term investment for them? Every goodnight kiss, every plate of hot food, every "I love you, my son"? Had it simply been a way to secure their future inheritance? The days at Audrey's house became a melancholy routine. I got up early because at 73 the body no longer knows the luxury of sleeping in. I would prepare coffee for both of us and sit in her small garden, watching the plants she cared for grow, with the patience of someone who is no longer in a hurry for anything. Audrey would go shopping or visit her own grandchildren, and she would leave me alone with my thoughts and the constant rumble of traffic on Central Avenue. A week after settling on her sofa, my children finally called me. First it was Lucy, with that sweetly concerned voice she had perfected since childhood. "Mum, where are you? We went to look for you at the house and you're not there. We are very worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated, feeling the indignation heat my face. "Worried about the woman you put a maid in front of so she couldn't enter her own house?" "Oh, Mom, that was a misunderstanding. Rosa misinterpreted the instructions. We just wanted someone there to look after you, to make sure nothing happened to you while you were alone." Lies wrapped in gift paper, manipulation disguised as maternal love. "Where are you, Mum? We'll come for you right now." "I'm not going to tell you where I am, and I don't want you to come for me. I want you to explain to me why you hired a lawyer to declare me incapacitated. I want you to explain to me why you told David I'm mentally ill." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Mum, I don't know what you're talking about. I think someone is putting strange ideas in your head. That worries me very much." There it was again, the insinuation that my mind wasn't working correctly, that my suspicion were the product of the senile dementia they had invented to justify their betrayal. Scott called me 2 days later with a different strategy. He was no longer the worried son. He was the CPA talking to me as if I were a problematic client. "Mum, we need to resolve this misunderstanding immediately. You have financial responsibilities that you can't just abandon like this. The house taxes need to be paid this month. And without you, we can't access the accounts." "Oh, without me, you can't access the accounts. But you asked me for all my passwords months ago. Why did you want them if it wasn't to access them without me?" "Mum, please don't complicate things. Just come back home and we'll sort all this out as a family." "I'm not coming back until you explain what you're doing with my money and why you hired a lawyer without my knowledge." Scott exhaled with that exasperation he used to show when I didn't understand his explanations about investments and bank returns. "Look, Mum, if you don't come back and don't cooperate, we're going to have to take legal measures to protect your assets. It's for your own good." Threats. Now they were openly threatening me. After that call, I sat in Audrey's garden, among her petunia pots and rose bushes, finally understanding the magnitude of what I was facing. My children didn't just want my money. They were willing to destroy my reputation, my dignity, and my mental health to get it. And they had the legal tools and professional contacts to do it. It was a war, and I didn't even know it had started. That same afternoon, while Audrey was watching her soap opera and I was pretending to read a People magazine from 3 months ago, my phone vibrated with a WhatsApp notification. It was a message from David, my grandson, and my heart raced thinking that maybe he wanted to see me, that maybe he missed our afternoons of lemonade and oatmeal cookies. But when I opened the message, I found a photo that broke my soul into pieces so small, I didn't know if I could ever pick them all up. It was an image of my living room, my own living room, but completely transformed. They had removed the rocking chair where I used to spend my afternoons reading. They had moved my mother-in-law's green velvet sofa against the wall, and in the centre, where my coffee table with family photos used to be, there was now a modern glass desk with a computer I didn't recognize. David had written, "Grandma, look how your living room turned out. Dad says he's going to make his home office here because you don't use it anymore. You don't use it anymore." As if I had died. As if my forced absence was a voluntary decision. A natural retirement from life that they could take advantage of to redistribute my space according to their convenience. I showed the photo to Audrey, who was preparing quesadillas for dinner. She looked at the image for a long moment. Then she turned off the stove and sat down next to me on the sofa. "Kathy, do you have the papers for the house? Do you have the original deeds?" "Yes, I have them in my purse. I always carry them with me since Robert died, just in case." "And your husband's will? Do you have that too?" I pulled the documents out of my black leather purse, the one I had bought at the department store 15 years ago, and that had accompanied me to every important official transaction in my life. Audrey reviewed every paper with the meticulousness of someone who had spent decades dealing with school bureaucracies and knew how to read the fine print. "Kathy, look at this," she said, pointing to a clause in the will that I had never particularly noticed. "Your husband put a very specific condition here. It says that if anyone tries to revoke your legal power without legitimate medical evidence and official psychiatric evaluations from at least 2 recognized medical institutions, all assets are automatically frozen and remain under your exclusive control until the situation is legally resolved." I read the clause over and over, feeling something akin to hope beginning to grow in my chest, like a small but persistent plant. Robert had always been a provident man, especially after seeing how his friend Charles' brothers had fought over the inheritance when the old man died. But I never thought that foresight would save me from my own children. "What exactly does this mean?" I asked Audrey. "It means they can't do anything legal against you without having real medical proof. And it means that if they try to do it with false documents, you can activate this clause and block everything until a judge determines who is right." I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of sadness, but because of something like excitement. I had a weapon my children didn't know existed. I had an ace up my sleeve that Robert had put there precisely to protect me from situations like this. The next day, Audrey accompanied me to the office of Mr. Alan Peterson, a lawyer who had handled some legal matters for the school where we worked. He was a man in his 60s, with a grey moustache, and that measured way of speaking that characterizes lawyers who have seen too many family dramas to be surprised by anything. I told him the whole story. The false medical documents, the passwords they had asked for, the maid who had blocked my entrance, Scott's threats about taking legal action. Mr. Peterson listened, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad that seemed to have witnessed as many family tragedies as he had. "Mrs. Wilson, what your children are trying to do is called elder financial abuse, and it is a federal crime," he told me when I finished my story. But the clause your husband included in the document is extraordinarily intelligent. With this, we can not only protect your assets, but also demonstrate that the accusations of mental incapacity are false and malicious. The process was simpler than I expected. Mr. De Peterson contacted the attorney who had handled Robert's original will, a man who had known us for decades and perfectly remembered the conversations he had had with my husband about protecting Kathy from vultures who might take advantage of her widowhood. On a Tuesday afternoon in February, while Scott and Lucy believed I was hiding like a helpless old woman, I was at the attorney's office signing the documents that would activate the Asset Protection Clause. With this, Mrs. Wilson, all bank accounts, properties, and investments are under your exclusive control until any dispute over your mental capacity is legally resolved, the attorney explained to me. Your children can try whatever legal actions they want, but they won't be able to touch a single dollar of your assets until they prove with legitimate medical documents that you really need a legal guardian. But my revenge was just beginning. That same afternoon, I returned to my house accompanied by Mr. Peterson and a court officer. The maid who had blocked my entrance a week earlier now opened the gate with a nervous reverence, clearly confused by my legal entourage. Scott was in my living room, in my house, sitting behind the glass desk he had installed where my coffee table used to be. When he saw me enter, his expression changed from surprise to irritation, as if I were an intruder interrupting his work in his personal office. "Mum, what are you doing here? Who are these people?" "I am Mr. Alan Peterson," my lawyer introduced himself with the formality these situations require. "I legally represent Mrs. Catherine Wilson in this asset matter. We are officially notifying you that all bank accounts and properties under Mrs. Wilson's name have been frozen until further notice, and that any attempt to access these assets without her written authorization constitutes a federal crime." Scott stood up from my desk, his face growing paler. "What are you talking about? My mother has memory problems. We are protecting her assets for her own good." "Do you have official medical documents demonstrating that incapacity?" the court officer asked. "Well, we are in the process of—" "He doesn't have them," I interrupted, feeling a strength in my voice I hadn't felt in months. "Why don't they exist?" "Because I'm not sick, Scott. I am perfectly lucid and perfectly aware that you have been planning to steal everything your father and I built during 35 years of marriage." At that moment, Lucy arrived, carrying shopping bags, and with that feigned surprise expression she had perfected since she was a teenager. "Mom, it's so good you're back. We were so worried." "Ma'am," Mr. Peterson interrupted her, "you are also officially notified about the activated asset protection. Any documentation you have presented to any legal instance to declare your mother incapacitated will be investigated for documentary fraud if it does not include the appropriate medical evaluations." I saw Lucy and Scott exchange a look that said everything. There was panic in their eyes. The sudden realization that their carefully laid plan was crumbling like a sandcastle under the rain. "This is ridiculous," Scott murmured. "She's our mother. We just want to take care of her." "Then," I replied, feeling how each word returned a piece of my dignity, "demonstrate that care by respecting my decisions and stopping treating me as if I were a child incapable of managing her own life." But I knew this was just the beginning. The real war was only starting. The following days were an emotional roller coaster that kept me awake until the early hours of the morning, reviewing every conversation, every gesture, every look I had exchanged with my children in recent months. I had returned to my house. Yes, but it no longer felt like my home. It felt like a battlefield, where every corner held memories of the family I thought I had, and evidence of the betrayal I had actually been living. Scott and Lucy did not leave immediately after the legal notification. They stayed that first night, circling my house like uncomfortable ghosts, whispering to each other in the kitchen while I pretended to watch television in the living room. I heard them making phone calls in low voices, probably contacting the crooked lawyer they had hired to plan my legal incapacitation. "It can't be that hard," I heard Scott tell someone on the phone from the backyard. "She's a 73-year-old woman. There has to be some way to prove she's not in her right mind." Those words pierced me like thorns. A 73-year-old woman. I had stopped being their mother to become an administrative obstacle, a legal problem to solve, a statistical figure that represented the only thing standing between them and my money. The next day, Friday morning, David arrived for his routine visit, but this time he was accompanied by Lucy, who stood in the doorway of my living room as if she were a bodyguard supervising a high-risk meeting. My grandson sat next to me on the sofa, but maintained physical distance, as if he had received specific instructions on how to behave with me. His little hands nervously played with the hem of his New York Yankees t-shirt, and he avoided looking me directly in the eyes. "David, my love, how are you? How was school this week?" I asked him, trying to sound normal even though I felt Lucy's watchful gaze burning the back of my neck. "Fine, Grandma," he replied in a low voice, but kept looking toward where his aunt was instead of looking at me. "Do you want me to prepare you some lemonade? Or would you prefer a glass of chocolate milk?" David finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something that broke my heart, confusion mixed with fear. "Mum says I can't eat things you give me anymore, because sometimes you forget if they're good or not." Lucy quickly approached from the door. "What happens, Mum, is that the doctor says sometimes older people don't realize when food is spoiled or when the expiration dates have passed. It's for safety, that's all." Another lie wrapped in false maternal concern. Another way to paint my supposed mental incapacity so that even my own grandson would begin to see me as a dangerous old woman from whom he had to be protected. "David," I told him, taking his little hands in mine, "do you think your Grandma Kathy doesn't know how to tell when food is good or bad? Do you think the woman who has taken care of you since you were a baby suddenly doesn't know how to cook?" The boy looked at me with those huge eyes full of confusion. I could see that he was struggling internally between what his parents had taught him to believe and what his own memories told him about me. "I don't know, Grandma. My parents know more than I do." At that moment, I knew they had won an important battle. They had managed to sow doubts about my mental competence, even in the person who loved me most unconditionally in the world. My own grandson now saw me as someone to be careful of. That afternoon, after Lucy took David away with the excuse that they had to go buy school supplies, I sat in my rocking chair looking at the rose bushes in the yard that already needed pruning. The phone rang, and when I answered, it was a voice I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Catherine Wilson?" "Yes, this is she." "This is Dr. Stevens from City General Hospital. Your son Scott asked me to contact you to schedule a neurological evaluation. He says the family is worried about some episodes of confusion and memory loss that you have been presenting." There it was, the next step in their plan. Now they were contacting doctors directly, probably offering them money to diagnose problems that didn't exist. "Doctor, with all due respect, I have not had any episodes of confusion or memory loss. I do not need any neurological evaluation, and I do not authorize my son to make medical appointments in my name." "Ma'am, I understand your resistance, but sometimes people who are developing cognitive problems don't realize their own symptoms. It would be advisable to—" I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, not from senility, but from pure indignation. How far were they willing to go? How many doctors, lawyers, and public officials were they willing to bribe to achieve their goal? That night, Scott came home with a different attitude. He was no longer the worried son or the professional accountant. He was a desperate man who had exhausted his subtle options and was prepared for direct confrontation. Mum, we need to talk seriously, he told me, sitting down in front of me in the living room without taking off his shoes, something I had always asked him to do since he was a child. Talk, I replied, crossing my arms. This situation has gotten out of control. You are acting irrationally. You hired lawyers to fight your own family. You are rejecting medical help that you clearly need. This can't continue. This can't continue? Do you mean that you can't steal my money as easily as you thought? Scott stood up from the sofa violently, as if my words were physical blows. We are not trying to steal anything from you. We are trying to protect you from yourself. Look at yourself, Mum. You are paranoid. You believe that everyone is against you. You don't even trust your own children. I have reasons not to trust you, I replied with a calm that surprised even myself. I have a maid who told me I couldn't enter my own house. I have a grandson who is afraid of me because he was told I'm crazy. I have doctors I don't know making appointments to evaluate me without my consent. Do you think that's paranoia, Scott? My son looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was pure contempt, without disguises or pretensions of filial affection. You know what, Mum? Fine. Keep your money. Live alone in this huge house, without family, without anyone to take care of you when you really start needing it. But don't come crying when you realize that money can't buy you companionship or affection. He left that night, taking his things and the glass desk he had installed in my living room. Lucy came the next day to pick up some belongings she had left in the guest room, and her goodbye was just as cold. I hope you're happy, Mum. I hope changing your family for a pile of cash is worth it. They left, but I knew they hadn't given up. I knew my children well enough to know that when they wanted something, they would stop at nothing to get it. This had only been their first failed strategy. They were surely planning their next move. And I was right. A week later, while I was watering my rose bushes in the backyard, my neighbour Martha knocked on my door with a worried expression and a newspaper in her hands. "Kathy, have you seen this?" she asked me, handing me the local newspaper, the Phoenix Chronicle, open to the classified ads section. There, in black letters on a white background, was an announcement that left me breathless. Family seeks information about the whereabouts and mental state of Catherine Hope Wilson, 73 years old, who suffers from senile dementia and may pose a danger to herself and others. If you have seen her or have information about her location, please contact Scott Wilson at the following phone number. They had published an ad in the newspaper painting me as a demented and dangerous elderly woman who was lost in the city. They were publicly destroying my reputation, making sure that anyone who knew me would begin to see me as a senile lunatic they had to be careful of. But this time, instead of crying or getting depressed, I felt something different growing in my chest. It was anger. It was determination. It was the clear realization that if they wanted to play dirty, I had more experience than they imagined. It was time to show them who Catherine Hope Wilson really was. The ad in the newspaper was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was also the mistake I needed to demonstrate how far my children were willing to go. That same afternoon, I cut out the ad with the kitchen scissors and put it in a folder along with all the documents I had been collecting, the false medical reports, the recordings of the threatening phone calls, the photographs I had taken of my living room, turned into an office without my permission. Each piece of evidence was one more brick in the wall of my legal defense, but it was also one more stab in the heart of a mother who had believed for 73 years that family love was unconditional and sacred. The next day, I showed up at the offices of the Phoenix Chronicle with my best dress, the navy blue one I had worn to Scott's college graduation, and with a dignity I had been slowly forging during weeks of humiliation. I asked to speak with the editor responsible for the classifieds, a young man about 30 years old, who received me with the nervous courtesy of someone who senses he is about to get into legal trouble. "Sir, I am Catherine Hope Wilson, I told him, placing my driver's license on his desk. I am the woman described in this classified ad as a lost and dangerous lunatic. The man reviewed the ad and then looked at me with a mixture of confusion and growing panic. Ma'am, we didn't know that. Of course you didn't know, because the people who paid for this ad lied about my mental condition and my whereabouts. I am perfectly lucid. I live in my house and I have never posed a danger to anyone. This ad is defamatory and was published with the malicious intention of damaging my reputation. I explained the whole situation. My children's attempt to declare me incapacitated, the falsified medical documents, the conspiracy to take over my assets. The editor took notes frantically as I spoke, clearly aware that his newspaper had been used as an instrument in a family fraud. Mrs. Wilson, we will withdraw the ad immediately and publish an apology if you wish. We had no idea the information was false. I don't want apologies, I replied, with the firmness I had learned to cultivate in these weeks of family war. I want you to provide me with all the information about who paid for this ad, when they paid for it, and if you have recordings of the conversations where they presented this false information about me. The editor handed me copies of everything: the payment receipt in Scott's name, the transcript of the phone call where he had described my supposed dementia with elaborate and convincing details, even a copy of the check with which he had paid for the ad. Each document was one more proof of the conspiracy they had mounted against me. That same afternoon, my lawyer filed a lawsuit for defamation against Scott, using the newspaper ad as primary evidence. But I knew they wouldn't stop there. I knew my children, and when they felt cornered, their creativity for causing harm became infinite. I didn't have to wait long to discover their next move. On Sunday morning, as I prepared to go to church as I had done for 40 years, my phone started ringing non-stop. First, it was Martha, my neighbor across the street. "Kathy, are you all right? I saw some posts on Facebook that have me very worried." Then the lady who sells newspapers on the corner of my street called. "Mrs. Wilson, is what they're saying about you on social media true?" Then it was Father Michael from the parish. "Kathy, my dear, some rumors about your mental health have reached my ears and they have me very uneasy." With my heart racing, I asked Audrey to help me check Facebook, that social network I had never fully understood, but which had apparently become the new battlefield where my children had decided to destroy my reputation. What we found left me speechless. Lucy had created a post on her personal profile, with a photo of me taken without my knowledge, where I appear sitting in my rocking chair, with my hair a little dishevelled by the wind. The photo was accompanied by a text that made me tremble with indignation, with much heartache. "I share with you that my mum, Kathy, is going through a very severe process of mental deterioration. She has begun to have episodes of paranoia, where she believes her own family wants to harm her. She has become aggressive, distrustful, and no longer recognizes the people who love her most. We have begged her to accept medical help, but she refuses outright. As a family, we are devastated watching the woman we love so much get lost in her own mind. We ask for your prayers for her to find peace and accept the treatment she needs." The post had 73 comments from people I had known for decades. Teachers who had worked with me, neighbors who greeted me every day, parents whose children I had educated for years, all expressing pity for my mental deterioration and admiration for the patience and love my children showed in this difficult family situation. Scott had shared his sister's post, adding his own comment. "It is very painful to see our mother pull away from us due to an illness she cannot control, but we will continue to fight for her, no matter how much she rejects us or how much she hurts us with her accusations. Family love is stronger than any illness." They had converted my resistance to their theft into symptoms of dementia. They had transformed my legitimate legal defense into paranoid episodes. They had painted my refusal to be scammed as senile aggressiveness, and they had done it publicly, in front of my entire community, making sure that anyone who saw me on the street would look at me with pity instead of respect. But the most painful thing of all were the comments. People who had known me for decades now wrote things like, "Poor Mrs. Cathy, how sad to see her like this," and "What noble children she has. Anyone else would have abandoned her by now." And "It's normal at that age. My grandma also got very difficult before she died." In a single Facebook post, my children had achieved what months of legal manipulation had failed to do: turn me into a victim of my own supposed mental illness in the eyes of my entire community. That night, after reading every comment with the masochism of someone who cannot stop touching a wound that hurts, I sat in my rocking chair in the backyard and cried as I hadn't cried since Robert died. But I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from rage. I cried from indignation. I cried from a fury so pure that it frightened me. Audrey stayed with me that night, sleeping on the living room sofa in case I needed company. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she found me sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea in my hands, looking at the family photographs stuck on the refrigerator. "Cathy, are you okay?" "You know what's the saddest thing about all this, Audrey?" I told her without looking away from a photo where Scott and Lucy are hugging me on Mother's Day last year. "It's not that they want my money. Money comes and goes. What hurts me is that they are willing to destroy my dignity, my reputation, my place in this community where I've lived all my life, just to get it." Audrey sat next to me and put her hand over mine. "Cathy, I've known you for more than 30 years. Anyone who really knows you knows you're not crazy. Lies have short legs. But people who don't know me well will believe what they read on Facebook, and my grandchildren are going to grow up thinking that their grandma Cathy was a senile lunatic who turned against her own family." At that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I got up from the kitchen table. I went to my room, and I took out a shoebox from the closet where I kept important documents that no one else knew about. Inside was something that not even my lawyer knew existed. An audio recording I had made on my phone the day Scott and Lucy first came to talk to me about my situation. It was a 45-minute recording where it was clearly heard how my children planned to declare me incapacitated, how they had contacted the crooked doctor, how they had discussed the division of my assets, as if I were already dead. Everything was there, in their own voices, without possibility of denial or manipulation. Robert had always told me that when people underestimate you for being an older woman, that underestimation becomes your secret weapon. It was time to use it. The next day, Monday morning, I dressed in my grey tailored suit, the one I had worn for important meetings at school. I tied my hair in an impeccable bun and put on makeup with the care of a woman who knows she is about to fight the most important battle of her life. Audrey accompanied me to the offices of the local CBS News affiliate, where I had secured an appointment with the producer of the morning show, Phoenix Daybreak. The producer, a woman in her 40s named Patricia Morales, received me in her office full of television screens and journalistic awards. I told her my complete story, omitting no details, showing her every document, every piece of evidence, every proof of the conspiracy my children had mounted against me. "Mrs. Wilson," Patricia told me after listening to my story for an hour, "this is exactly the kind of story we need to tell. Elder financial abuse is a silent epidemic in America, and most victims never get a chance to defend themselves publicly." But I had something else to show her. I took out my Nokia phone and played fragments of the recording I had secretly made the day Scott and Lucy came to talk to me about my situation. Scott's voice sounded clear and cold. "Look, Lucy, the doctor says that with the reports we gave him, He can justify a diagnosis of senile dementia. It will cost $5,000 extra, but it's worth it if we can speed up the legal process. And Lucy's voice, equally calculating. And what happens if Mum resists? If she tries to defend herself? A 73-year-old woman against two professionals with legal contacts. Please. Besides, who is going to believe her? She's old enough for people to assume she's losing her mind. Patricia listened to the recording, her eyes growing wider and wider. Mrs. Wilson, do you authorize me to use this recording on the air? With this, we can prove that everything they did to you was premeditated and malicious. Use everything you need, I replied. I have nothing left to lose, and maybe my story can help other people who are going through the same thing. The program aired on Wednesday morning. I appeared sitting in the studio, my hands calm in my lap, speaking with the serenity of a woman who had decided not to allow anyone else to humiliate her. I told my story without tears, without melodrama, only with the dignity of the facts and the force of the truth. When they played the fragments of the recording, I could see in the host's face the same indignation I had felt for weeks. The program's phones immediately began ringing with calls from viewers who wanted to express their support or tell similar stories of family abuse. What we want our viewers to understand, I said, looking directly at the camera, is that no matter how old you are, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, no one has the right to steal your dignity or your assets. And if you are the son or daughter of an older person, remember that your parents are not an investment that you are going to cash in when they die. They are human beings who deserve respect until the last day of their lives. The impact was immediate and devastating for Scott and Lucy. Within 2 hours of the broadcast, my phone started ringing with furious calls from both of them. Scott was the first. "Mom, you're crazy. How dare you go on television to talk about private family matters? You've ridiculed us publicly." "Scott," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "I didn't ridicule you. You ridiculed yourselves when you decided to conspire against your own mother. I just told the truth. You made that recording without our consent. That's illegal. In this country, a person has the right to record conversations in her own home to protect herself from crimes. Consult with your crooked lawyer, Scott. I'm sure he can explain the laws better than I can." Lucy called 20 minutes later with a different strategy. She was no longer the manipulative daughter. Now she was the misunderstood victim. "Mom, how could you do this to us? We are your family. Everyone we know saw the program. The parents at David's school are talking about us. You've ruined your own grandson's reputation." "Lucy, David's reputation was ruined the day you decided to publish lies about my mental health on Facebook. A child shouldn't grow up watching his parents destroy his grandmother for money." "It's not for money. It's because you're sick and you don't want to accept it." "Then prove it. Take me to an independent neurologist, to a psychiatrist who isn't a friend of your husband's, to any legitimate doctor you want. If I'm really sick, the real medical studies will prove it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. We both knew that no legitimate doctor would find evidence of dementia or cognitive decline in me. "We can't fix this as a family anymore," Lucy finally murmured. "This all got out of control." "It got out of control the day you decided to treat me as if I were your property instead of your mother." The following days were a revelation about the power of truth when it is told publicly. I received calls of support from people I didn't even know, letters from other older women who had gone through similar situations, even visits from journalists from other media outlets who wanted to delve into the topic of elder financial abuse. But the most important thing was the call I received on Friday afternoon. It was from the District Attorney's Elder Abuse Unit, informing me that they had opened an official investigation against Scott and Lucy for fraud, falsification of documents, and elder financial abuse. The recording I had broadcast on television was enough evidence to initiate criminal proceedings. Mrs. Wilson, the prosecutor explained to me, with the evidence you have provided, we can proceed criminally against your children. If their guilt is proven, they would face between 5 and 12 years in prison, in addition to the permanent loss of any inheritance rights to your assets. That night, while I was eating a simple turkey sandwich alone in my kitchen, I reflected on the irony of the situation. My children had tried to use my age and my gender against me, assuming that an older woman was vulnerable by definition. They hadn't counted on the fact that that same older woman had 73 years of experience facing adversity, 73 years of learning to be strong when the world expected her to be weak. On Saturday morning, while I was watering my rose bushes in the backyard, I heard someone knocking on my gate. It was David, my grandson, accompanied by Scott. But this time the boy didn't hide behind his father. He ran toward me with that spontaneity that adults lose when they learn to calculate every gesture. "Grandma Kathy, I saw you on TV. My friends at school say you're famous." I hugged him, feeling something being repaired inside my chest. David didn't see me as a demented old woman. He saw me as the grandma who had been on television, who had been brave, who had fought for what was right. Scott stood next to the gate, with an expression I had never seen on his face. He wasn't the arrogant accountant or the manipulative son. He was a defeated man who had miscalculated and was now facing the consequences of his actions. "Mum," he told me in a voice that sounded strangely small, "we need to talk." "Now you want to talk," I replied, without letting go of David from my embrace. After months of conspiring behind my back, after publishing lies about my mental health, after trying to steal my house and my money, now you want to talk. Things got out of control. It wasn't how we planned it. It wasn't how they had planned it. What was the plan then, Scott? To declare me crazy in silence, steal my assets in secret, and wait for me to die without causing problems? David looked at me with confusion, clearly not fully understanding the conversation, but feeling the tension between his father and me. "Grandma," he said, not knowing how to respond, "how do you explain to an 8-year-old child that his father had tried to rob his own mother? How do you protect a grandson's innocence without lying about the reality of what had happened?" "Your dad made some wrong decisions, my love, but adults can sometimes fix our mistakes if we are willing to do the right thing." I looked Scott directly in the eyes. "The question is whether you are willing to do the right thing, son." Scott remained silent for a moment that felt eternal, looking at his son, who was still hugging me with the innocent confidence of someone who doesn't fully understand adult betrayals, but recognizes genuine love. I could see in my oldest son's eyes something I hadn't seen in months: real shame. Not the feigned shame of someone who has been discovered, but the deep shame of someone who finally realizes the magnitude of what he has done. "David, go play in the backyard," Scott told his son in a softer voice than he had used with me in a long time. "Your grandma and I have to talk about adult things." The boy gave me a kiss on the cheek and ran toward the rose bushes, where he began to look for ladybugs under the leaves, as I had taught him to do since he was very small. Scott and I were left alone under the shade of the lemon tree that Robert had planted when David was born. "Mum, the prosecutor cited me to testify on Monday," Scott told me, sitting down on one of the plastic chairs I had in the patio. "My lawyer says that with the recording you presented and all the evidence you have, Lucy and I could face up to 12 years in jail." "And that worries you?" I asked him without sitting down, remaining standing with the dignity of a woman who had already decided not to show weakness to the person who had tried to destroy her. "Of course it worries me. I have a son. I have responsibilities. I can't go to jail." There it was again. There was no remorse for having hurt me. There was no apology for having tried to rob me. only concern about the consequences he would have to face. Scott, for 8 months, you planned to legally declare me incapacitated. You hired crooked doctors, you falsified documents, you kicked me out of my own house, you destroyed my reputation publicly, and you even used my grandson to make me believe I was losing my mind. At any point during that entire process, did you think about the consequences I would have to face? My son lowered his gaze toward his shoes, those shiny leather shoes that I had once admired, as a symbol of the professional success he had achieved. It wasn't personal, Mum. It was just that we needed the money. Lucy and her husband are about to get divorced, and he is going to ask for half of everything. I have office debts I can't pay. We thought that if you couldn't manage your finances anymore, we could— It wasn't personal, I repeated, feeling the indignation rise in my throat like bile. Scott, you tried to declare me crazy. You made my own grandson afraid of me. You threw me out of my house as if I were a stranger. How is that not personal? We never wanted to hurt you. We just wanted to secure the family's future. The family's future? What family, Scott? The family you destroyed when you decided to view your mother as a walking bank account. The family that ended the day you preferred money over respect. At that moment, David ran back from the backyard with a ladybug in the palm of his small hand. Grandma, look, I found a super big one. Will you help me put it in your garden so it eats the pests? His innocence was like a ray of light in the midst of the darkness that had consumed my family. This child still saw me as the grandma who loved him unconditionally, who taught him about beneficial insects and prepared him lemonade. For him, I was still the same person as always. Of course, my love, I told him, carefully taking the ladybug. Ladybugs are very important because they keep the plants healthy without using harmful chemicals. As I helped David place the ladybug on a rose leaf, I felt Scott's gaze on us. When I turned to look at him, there were tears in his eyes, but I didn't know if they were tears of genuine remorse or tears of self-pity for the consequences he was facing. David, Scott told his son, we have to go now. Your mum is waiting for us. Can't I stay longer with my grandma? I haven't been here in a long time. Another day, son. We have to go now. After David said goodbye to me with the promise to return soon, Scott and I were alone again. It was my opportunity to ask him something that had been tormenting me for weeks. Scott, I need you to answer something honestly. How long had you been planning this? Since when did I stop being your mother to become your financial target? My son ran his hands through his hair, with that nervous gesture he had since childhood, when he knew he had done something wrong. Since Dad died, he finally admitted, since we knew how much money he had left. At first it was just curiosity, but then we started calculating how long you might live, how much money you might spend, what would happen if you developed some expensive illness. His words hit me like physical punches. Since Robert died, since the most vulnerable moment of my life, when I was mourning the loss of the man I had loved for 35 years, my children were already calculating when they could claim their inheritance. While I was mourning your father's death at that funeral, while I couldn't even get out of bed from the pain, you were already planning how to take away what he had left me to take care of myself. It wasn't like that, Mum. It wasn't so calculated at first. No? Then when did it become calculated, Scott? When exactly did you decide that I was an obstacle that you had to remove? Scott didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Lucy, but this time her voice sounded different. She wasn't the manipulative daughter or the misunderstood victim. She was a desperate woman. Mum, please, I need to talk. My husband filed for divorce and he's asking for half of everything, including the house. If I go to jail for this fraud thing, I'm going to lose my children. Please, I need you to drop the charges. Lucy? No. Let me finish. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what Scott and I did was unforgivable. But my children don't deserve to pay for our mistakes. Sarah cries every night asking why her dad says her mum is a bad person. Matt has started wetting the bed again since all this legal process began. Her words came to me like stabs, directly to the maternal heart that, despite everything, still beat for my innocent grandchildren. My husband already has everything arranged to take the children to live with him in Atlanta tomorrow morning. He says that as long as I have pending legal problems, he doesn't want the children to be in a toxic and unstable environment. His exact words. I sat down in my rocking chair, feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't anticipated having to make. For months, I had been fighting for my dignity, for my right to be respected, for the idea that betrayals must have consequences. But now, sitting in front of my daughter, who was crying silently, listening to my grandchildren's laughter in the patio, I realized that justice sometimes costs prices we hadn't calculated. "And what about Scott?" I asked her. "Did he also come to beg?" Lucy shook her head. "Scott says that if you are going to destroy the family, you should do it completely. He says he no longer cares about going to jail because, either way, he has already lost his mother." Those words hurt more than I expected. Scott had decided that he preferred to see me as an enemy rather than fully admit his mistakes and ask for unconditional forgiveness. "But I do come to admit everything, Mum. I come to tell you that we were sons of bitches, that we don't deserve your forgiveness, that what we did was theft and betrayal and abuse. I come to tell you that you are right about everything, and that I understand why you want to see us in jail." Her tears were different from all the others I had seen from her in these months. They were not tears of manipulation or self-pity. They were tears of a mother who was losing her children because of her own greed. "But I also come to tell you that if you forgive me, if you drop the charges, I swear on my father's memory that I will never ask you for another dollar. I will never interfere in your financial decisions again. I will stay away from you if that's what you want. But please don't let my children pay for what I did." At that moment, Sarah ran in from the patio. "Grandma, Grandma! I found a hummingbird nest in your lemon tree. Come look." I took her hand and followed her to the patio, where there was indeed a small hummingbird nest hidden among the branches of the tree that Robert had planted when David was born. It was a tiny nest, perfectly built, with 2 little eggs the size of beans that shone like pearls under the sunlight. "Are they going to hatch soon, Grandma?" Sarah asked me with that infinite curiosity that characterizes 6-year-old children. "Yes, my love. In a few weeks, 2 baby hummingbirds are going to come out, and they will learn to fly in this very patio." "And are we going to be here to see them?" My granddaughter's question pierced me like an arrow straight to the center of the dilemma I had been avoiding facing. If I maintained the charge against Lucy, these children would leave for Atlanta tomorrow morning. And they wouldn't be here to see the hummingbirds hatch. They wouldn't be here for me to teach them about life, about nature, about the unconditional love that a grandmother can give. "I don't know, my sweetie," I replied honestly. "That depends on very complicated decisions that adults have to make." Matt approached us, carrying a ladybug he had found under the rose leaves. "Grandma, will you help me put it in the right place? I forgot where you said they like to live." As I helped Matt place the ladybug on a leaf where it could do its work of natural pest control, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. These children represented something more important than my wounded pride or my need for justice. They represented the future, the possibility that something good and pure would grow from the ashes of this destroyed family. We returned to the living room, where Lucy was still sitting with red but dry eyes, awaiting my verdict like a prisoner awaits her sentence. Lucy, I told her, sitting down across from her, if I drop the charge, it is not because I forgive you. It is not because I forget what you did. And it is definitely not because I believe you deserve another chance. My daughter nodded, understanding that she was about to hear conditions she could not negotiate. If I drop the charge, it is because those children do not deserve to lose their mother for the mistakes their mother made. It is because I don't want Sarah and Matt to grow up thinking that their grandma Kathy chose revenge over their well-being. I swear, Mum, I'll never— Don't swear anything to me, I interrupted. Your promises no longer have value for me, but I am going to do this for my grandchildren, not for you. I got up and went to the phone to call my lawyer. As I dialed the number, I could hear Sarah and Matt laughing in the patio, oblivious to the adult drama that had been defining their destinies. Mr. Peterson, I said when he answered, this is Kathy Wilson. I need you to immediately withdraw the charge against my daughter Lucy. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Wilson? Are you sure? With all the evidence we have, it's very likely that— I am completely sure. Withdraw the charge against Lucy immediately. And what about the charge against Scott? Does that remain? I looked toward the patio, where my grandchildren were still playing with the innocence of someone who doesn't know that their world was being saved by a last-minute decision. That one stays, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. Scott had the same opportunity as Lucy to come here and beg for his children. He chose his pride. She chose her children. The consequences are based on the choices. I hung up the phone and turned to Lucy, who looked at me with a mixture of relief and confusion. Why didn't you withdraw Scott's too? Because Scott didn't come here as a desperate mother. He came as a calculating accountant, trying to negotiate a cheap exit. You came as a mother. The difference is important. That afternoon, while her husband was cancelling the plane tickets to Atlanta, and Lucy was hugging her children as if she hadn't seen them in years, I sat in my rocking chair reflecting on the price of justice and the value of forgiveness. I hadn't forgiven Lucy. I probably never would completely. But I had chosen my grandchildren over my thirst for revenge, and that choice gave me a different kind of peace than the one I had expected to find. Scott, on the other hand, would face the full consequences of his actions. He had had the opportunity to choose humility over pride, family over ego, but he had preferred to maintain his stance until the end. Sometimes, justice is not perfect, but sometimes, the imperfection of justice is what makes it human. 6 months after that afternoon when Lucy begged on her knees for her children, my life had found a different rhythm, one I hadn't imagined possible when it all began. It was a slower, more reflective rhythm, like that of someone who has survived a storm and now appreciates the value of the clear sky. The mornings still began the same way: drip coffee at 6 o'clock, watering the plants at 7 o'clock, reading the newspaper in my rocking chair while listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood waking up. But now I had company on Friday afternoons. Sarah and Matt came to visit after school, and we had established a routine that healed all of us a little. Sarah helped me prepare lemonade while Matt chased butterflies in the patio. We had seen the hummingbirds hatch in the lemon tree, and now the small birds had become frequent visitors that the children looked forward to with excitement every week. Lucy scrupulously kept her word. She never asked me for money. She never questioned my decisions. And when she came to pick up the children, our interaction was polite but distant, like that of two neighbors who respect each other but are not intimately close. The forgiveness she had sought had not arrived, but mutual respect had grown slowly, like plants that need time to take root after being transplanted. Scott had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, falsification of documents, and elder financial abuse. The news had appeared in the local newspapers as part of a public awareness campaign about this type of crime. His photo appeared in the police section with a caption that read, "Certified public accountant sentenced for attempting to defraud his own mother." David, my oldest grandson, had begun psychological therapy to process the reality of having a father in prison and a grandmother who had been a victim of her own son. But the story hadn't ended there. On a Tuesday in April, while I was pruning the rose bushes that had bloomed with unusual exuberance after the March rains, I heard the familiar sound of a car stopping in front of my house. When I looked toward the street, I saw something I didn't expect. It was David, my 9-year-old grandson, walking alone toward my door with a school backpack on his back and an expression on his face that seemed too mature for his age. "Hi, Grandma Kathy," he said when I opened the gate, and his voice sounded different, deeper, as if he had aged years in these months. "My love, what are you doing here? Where is your mum?" "My mum is working. I took the bus from school. I already know which route gets to your house." A 9-year-old child had traveled alone on public transportation to come see me. The idea filled me with a mixture of pride for his determination and concern for his safety. "David, you shouldn't be riding the bus alone. It's dangerous." "I know how to take care of myself, Grandma. Besides, I needed to talk to you about something important." I let him in, and I prepared him a glass of lemonade, noticing how much he had grown in these months. He was no longer the little boy who played with my earrings. He was a young man who was learning to navigate an adult world more complicated than it should be for someone his age. "What did you want to talk about, my sweetie?" David took a sip of lemonade and looked at me with those eyes that looked so much like Scott's when he was small, but which now contained a seriousness his father had never developed. "Grandma, I went to visit my dad in jail last Sunday." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I knew he had the right to visit his father, but I hadn't been emotionally prepared to face how that experience would affect my grandson. "How did you feel seeing your dad there?" "Bad," he replied with the brutal honesty that only children can express. He looked thin and sad, and he was afraid that I hated him. "And do you hate him?" David shook his head slowly. "I don't hate him, but I also don't understand why he did what he did. My therapist says that sometimes good people make bad decisions, but my dad made a lot of bad decisions for a long time." My grandson's wisdom astonished me. At 9 years old, he was processing concepts about morality and responsibility that many adults never manage to fully understand. "What did your dad tell you when you visited him?" "He asked me to tell you that he's sorry, that he understands why you didn't drop the charges against him, and that he thanks you for dropping the ones against Aunt Lucy, because that way Sarah and Matt can be with their mum." I felt something move in my chest, something akin to pain, but also relief. Scott had finally understood that my decisions had not been blind revenge, but carefully calibrated justice. "Is there anything else you want to tell me, David?" My grandson pulled a wrinkled envelope from his school backpack. "My dad wrote you a letter. He says he doesn't expect you to read it, but if you want to, it's there." I took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. The paper was cheap, the kind they use in prisons, and my name was written in Scott's handwriting, but more shaky, less sure of itself. "Do you want me to read it now, or would you prefer me to wait?" "Read it, Grandma. I already know what it says. My dad read it to me before giving it to me." I opened the envelope carefully, as if it contained something fragile that could break with a sudden movement. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten in a script that resembled Scott's, but which showed the marks of time and regret. "Mum," the letter began, "I know I don't deserve for you to read this, But David insisted on bringing it to you, and he deserves for his dad to try to do the right thing, even if it's too late. I've had 8 months to think about what we did, and every day I understand more clearly the magnitude of our betrayal. It wasn't just the money, Mum. It was that we treated you as if you were invisible, as if your feelings didn't matter, as if your dignity was something we could negotiate for our convenience. Lucy tells me you've been very good to Sarah and Matt, that you continue to be the loving grandmother you always were despite all the harm we caused you. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are and who I have been. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that I finally understand that you were an exemplary mother who raised a flawed son. The problem was never you. The problem was me and my inability to value what I had until I lost it. David is growing up to be a better man than I was. That is thanks to you, not me. Take care of him, Mum. Teach him the things I never learned about honor and respect, with love and regret that arrived too late, Scott. When I finished reading, I had tears in my eyes. But they were not tears of forgiveness. They were tears of mourning for the son who could have been and never was, for the mother-son relationship that had died during those months of betrayal, and that might never fully resurrect. Are you going to answer him, Grandma? David's question forced me to face something I had been avoiding. What would I do with this late repentance? How would a mother respond to a son who finally understood his mistakes, but from a prison cell? I don't know, my love. I need time to think about it. My therapist says that forgiveness is not something we do for the people who hurt us. It's something we do for ourselves, to stop carrying weight that doesn't belong to us. My grandson's wisdom left me speechless. Here was a child who had lost his father because of his own father's actions, but who was learning about forgiveness and healing in ways that I was still discovering. That night, after David went home in a taxi I paid for because I wasn't going to let him return alone on public transportation, I sat in my rocking chair in the patio to reread Scott's letter and reflect on forgiveness. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a binary decision that is made once and maintained forever. It was a process, a path that is traveled step by step, day by day, like the growth of plants that requires time, patience, and the right conditions to flourish. Maybe someday I could completely forgive Scott. Maybe not. But what I did know was that I was no longer carrying the weight of his betrayal like a stone in my chest. I had learned to live with the scar without allowing the wound to continue bleeding. And in that acceptance of the imperfection of forgiveness, I found a peace I hadn't expected. The peace of a woman who had fought for her dignity and had won something more valuable than revenge. She had won self-respect and the certainty that no one, ever again, could take away what really mattered. 2 weeks later, I wrote a response letter to Scott. It wasn't a letter of forgiveness, but it wasn't a letter of condemnation either. It was a letter from a mother who recognized that her son had finally grown up, even if he had needed to hit rock bottom to do it. Sometimes, maternal love means allowing the consequences to teach the lessons that words could not convey. A year after all that chaos, my life had taken a direction I had never imagined. It was a morning in October, just like the one when everything began. But this time, the scent of the candle on my altar mixed with the aroma of coffee I was preparing for more than one person. I had decided to turn my house into something that would give meaning to all the pain I had lived through. The idea had come slowly, like plants that grow without you noticing until one day you see them blooming. First, it was Martha, my neighbor, who knocked on my door one Thursday afternoon with her eyes swollen from crying. "Kathy, I don't know who else to talk to," she had told me, sitting in my living room with trembling hands. My son Robert wants me to sign some papers to put my house in his name. He says it's for protection in case I get sick, but something doesn't feel right. As I listened to her story, I recognized the same patterns I had lived through: the lies disguised as concern, the manipulation wrapped in filial love, the systematic way of making a mother doubt her own lucidity. Martha didn't just need advice. She needed someone who understood exactly what she was going through. Then it was Mrs. Thompson, the lady who sold tacos on the corner of the avenue. Her grandchildren had emptied her savings account using a card she had signed for emergencies. Then came a woman named Kathy, a retired teacher like me, whose children had sold her car without her permission and split the money. In 6 months, my living room had become an informal refuge for older women who were being financially and emotionally abused by their own families. We met on Tuesday afternoons. We drank coffee and shared stories that were too similar to be a coincidence. It was Audrey who suggested I formalize what I was already doing. Kathy, you need to register this as a non-profit. You need to give it structure, get legal support, make it something bigger than coffee chats in your living room. And so Hope's Haven was born, an organization I had founded with the money that Scott and Lucy had tried to steal from me. The irony was not lost on me. I was using my own inheritance to protect other women from the same abuses I had suffered. Now, on Tuesday afternoons, my house was filled with the voices of women between 60 and 80 years old, all with different stories but similar pain. We had the support of 2 young female lawyers who worked pro bono, a psychologist specialized in family abuse, and a social worker who helped us navigate the legal and health systems. But more important than the professional support was the emotional support we gave each other. There was something powerful in seeing a 75-year-old woman regain the confidence to report an abusive son because she had heard that another 80-year-old woman had done the same and had survived. The October morning when this story ends, I was preparing the living room for our weekly meeting when the phone rang. It was David, but his voice sounded different, more excited than usual. "Grandma Kathy, can I come see you after school today? I have something important to tell you." "Of course, my love. Is everything all right?" "Yes, it's fine. Better than fine. It's about my dad." When David arrived that afternoon, the women from Hope's Haven had already left after a particularly emotional session where we had helped Mrs. Thompson understand that her children did not have the legal right to sell her house without her consent, no matter how many times they told her it was for her own good. My grandson sat in the rocking chair that was now his favorite spot when he came to visit me, and he looked at me with those eyes that looked more and more like Robert's every day. "Grandma, my dad is getting out of jail." The words hit me like cold water. Scott had been sentenced to 8 years, but had barely served 1. "How is that possible, David?" "His lawyer managed to get his sentence reduced because he's doing something good in jail." David explained to me that Scott had started giving financial education classes to other inmates, teaching them about budgeting, savings, and economic planning. But more importantly, he had started facilitating a therapy group for men who had committed crimes against family members. The judge said that my dad is showing genuine rehabilitation and that his work is helping other inmates understand why they hurt their families. He's getting out in 6 months on parole. I felt a complex mixture of emotions that I didn't know how to process. Part of me was happy for David, who could have his father back. Another part of me felt afraid that Scott would return to our lives, bringing the chaos we had learned to live without. "How do you feel about that, David?" My grandson paused thoughtfully for a moment, playing with the straps of his backpack as he did when he was smaller. "I'm scared," he finally admitted. "But I also have hope. My therapist says that people can really change if they work very hard to do it, and my dad has been working very hard." "Have you talked to him about this?" "Yes. He tells me that he knows he needs to earn the right to be my dad again, that he understands that getting out of jail doesn't automatically mean everything is going to be okay between us. My 10-year-old grandson's maturity continued to amaze me. He had grown more in these 2 years than many adults in entire decades. And what do you think, Grandma? Do you think people can really change? It was a profound question that forced me to reflect on everything I had learned in these months, working with women who had been hurt by their loved ones. I believe that people can change, David, but I also believe that real change takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And I believe that people who have been hurt have the right to protect themselves until they are sure that change is genuine. Does that mean you won't want to see my dad when he gets out? It means I'm going to be very careful. Your dad will have to demonstrate with actions, not with words, that he has truly changed. And that will take time. Ah. That night, after David left, I sat in my backyard, looking at the stars and reflecting on the cycles of harm and healing I had observed in my own family and in the families of the women I now supported. I had learned that forgiveness is not a destination you arrive at, but a path you travel. I had learned that you can love someone, and at the same time protect yourself from them. I had learned that sometimes the most loving consequence you can give someone is to allow them to fully experience the result of their actions. 6 months later, on a Wednesday morning, while I was watering my rose bushes, I heard familiar footsteps in my patio. When I turned around, there was Scott. But he wasn't the arrogant Scott who had come to talk to me about my situation 2 years ago. He wasn't the desperate Scott who had brought lawyers to negotiate his freedom. This was a 45-year-old man who looked like he had aged a decade, with grey hairs he didn't have before, and lines on his face that spoke of sleepless nights and days of forced reflection. "Hello, Mum," he said, standing next to the gate without daring to enter without permission. "Hello, Scott." We looked at each other in silence for a moment that felt eternal. I was holding the garden hose. He was carrying a manila folder that I recognized as the same one he had brought that first time. But now his hands were trembling slightly. "Can I come in?" "Not into the house, just the patio. I have something to give you." I nodded, and he walked slowly toward where I was, keeping a respectful distance. "Mum, I've come to give you this," he said, extending the folder to me. "These are all the legal documents to formally transfer my part of Dad's inheritance to you. Everything that was mine, everything I tried to steal from you, I am officially relinquishing." I took the folder without opening it. Why? Because I don't deserve it. Because I want you to know that I understand that actions have consequences that last longer than jail sentences. Because I hope that someday, maybe, you can trust that I really changed. "Scott, the money was never the important thing." "I know," he replied. And for the first time in years, his voice sounded genuinely humble. "The important thing was respect. The important thing was treating you as the mother you were, not as the obstacle I thought you were. And that is what I really came to give you back. My respect." He was silent for a moment, looking at the rose bushes that were blooming exuberantly under the morning sun. "I'm not coming to ask for your forgiveness, Mum, because I know that's something that can take years to arrive, if it arrives at all. I'm coming to tell you that I understand why you did what you did, and that I'm glad you were strong enough to defend yourself from me." His words came to me like rain after a drought, not because I needed his validation, but because they confirmed something I had begun to believe, that sometimes the greatest pain can lead to the deepest growth. "What are your plans now?" I asked him. "Work, therapy, earning the right to be the father that David deserves. And if someday you allow me, proving that I can be the son you deserved from the beginning." When Scott left that day, I knew that our story hadn't ended, but I also knew that a new chapter had begun, one where mutual respect was possible, because it had been earned through pain, consequence, and hard work. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or do you know someone who has gone through a family betrayal like this? If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. And if you believe that this message can help someone who needs to hear that it is possible to defend oneself and get ahead, please like and share this channel. Sometimes, one person's story can be the lighthouse, another needs to find their way to dignity and self-respect.